I don't know where this ranks on. I'll let you figure out what you think is the most, kind of ranked in value of the most to least important of the three phases for an elite level kind of NFL athlete. The first part of that off season is obviously when the season's done, and whether you spend 3 days like me off or you spend 3 weeks like most of the guys now, you're usually away from the facility, particularly in Green Bay where it's negative 26 outside in February. Who wants to be there necessarily if you don't have to? Go back to your hometown, breathe some fresh air, or wherever you might live. You start training at that hometown gym. Maybe you go back to your college and they have a facility there that you like, or your old strength coach. Maybe you go to a private facility. Maybe you go down to one of these great places in Miami. There's a House of Athlete. There's a Bomberinos. There's a ton of good places down there to train. The benefit there, I think, is quite obvious in that you're going to get a ton of guys from across the league and across the country to kind of come together. And now you're pushing each other in this early part of the offseason, which I absolutely think is super, super valuable. Most of the structure that you're going to go through is the same, regardless of where you're at. If you have somebody that understands weight program is trying to program, and very, very generally speaking, you're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks working on kind of joint mobility, muscle pliability, kind of getting back into. This is kind of before the general physical preparedness, but just making sure everything moves right. Are we moving right? And then you're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks in general physical preparedness. That's just like gross motor skill development, a lot of compound movements. That would be like some kind of like some gym bro workouts, just some, maybe some pushing the cars as well, maybe some strongman stuff, but just general physical preparedness, nothing sports specific. And guys are trying to just kind of build that baseline again. You're trying to build up that foundation from the ground up. Now, some of your guys are going to have parameters from the team that they want to see, like, we need you to come in at this weight, or we need you to come in at this body fat percentage, or maybe they have a protocol from the nutritionist. They would like to see eat this way. But a lot of the guys now, when they go to these other places, one of the benefits of going there is they're going to have a lot of the stuff on site. They're going to have their own ideas of maybe not from the team standpoint, or maybe, like I always talk about when, Steve Hutchinson got drafted, he was 6'5", 315. So all of a sudden my coach goes, oh, you need to be 315. And I'm like 295. And it's like, well, that didn't work. Right. But there's no justification for it. So you'll get a different perspective on what you should weigh or what would help you move the best as it pertains to you as the athlete, not necessarily what they're thinking inside the building of what makes the perfect ideal football player, because that body type is not necessarily for you. Most guys, as you get older, are going to have a routine that they go through. They're going to feel really comfortable with it early on. Like the younger guys are the best kind of, time to get these guys is as soon as possible, because you go, okay, this is the process that we're going to go through. This is the foundation we're going to lay. This is the kind of the 6 to 8 weeks that we want to work on right now. And then at that point, you get around beginning of April, and depending on that time. So the next phase of that, by the way, would be you're starting to develop a lot. You're starting to get kind of with a very like more football specific strength phase and the power development phase. And then obviously there's some cardio stuff that you would go along with that. I, of course, would like to throw in that you'd start working your technical work as much as possible. Then you're going to go back to your facility. So phase 2 is we're going to go back. So we're in the mini camps, we're in the OTAs. This is the time where all the photos get taken. This is the time where all the fan interaction stuff happens. Fans love this part of the offseason. The reality is that the value to the athlete in this part of the season, because remember, it's like you're building up somewhere else. You do the mobility, you do the general physical preparedness. And I'm talking about guys that like are working out in the offseason, not just, some guys just don't do this. And then you're getting into that strength or power phase. And now you have to move and you go back to a facility. And the value to the athlete is really, it's kind of on a sliding scale based on where you happen to be employed. Because if the philosophy in lifting is different than what you've been doing, like you've got guys in the league that for a long time were like, hey, we're going to do a round of circuits, or we're going to do a circuit training. We're going to do some HIIT stuff. We're going to do some, we're Olympic lifters, we just do single joint exercises. We don't like to load anybody. there's so many different ways to look at this, that if you go into a place that's completely different than than the path that you were on, or they're not as taxing, or they don't value the same things that maybe you value, have learned to value, well, it's really different if you're just from a standpoint of like, I'm trying to improve myself as much as I can during the off season. And a lot of times these places might start over at like day one. We come in, we get acclimated, we're doing mobility again. So you just spent like 8 to 10 weeks of grinding, and it's like, all right, let's go back to day one again. And so that part is sometimes difficult. But again, it all depends on where you're at. You could have the best program in the world that completely aligns with what you want. You could have a program that doesn't align with you at all. Different gyms prioritize like movement over absolute strength. Gyms are into kettlebells over Olympic lifts. Some coaches like to train like the really complex movements. Some guys want to just like, hey, we'll do weighted plyos instead of clean and press. Everything works. I think the big deal is understanding that everything works. You have to understand the context that it's put in, understand the purpose behind it, buy into it a little bit, and then also understand that when you're in this facility and you have to be there, then from a player's perspective, it's like, okay, and I used to do this like when I went to Carolina and I had to be at workouts. I just literally brought in all my stuff and I said, hey, if I do your stuff, deal is you got to let me do my stuff, because at that time, my stuff is what got me the contract, and I don't want to start doing your stuff because I'm worried that your stuff is not going to get me the results that I've been getting. So you have to kind of make that all work, but you got to work within the context of like what's good for the building, what's good for the team. If you're really prioritizing your training in the off season and you have to switch it up, then for an athlete, it's like sometimes maybe it's not the best deal, but how do I put a positive spin on this, and how do I get the most out of kind of this phase, right? So you go through the phase, you got some on the field stuff that you got to do. You're back in the building, you're probably meeting more than you want, etc. You finish off with that last mini camp, and let's say it's mid-June. It used to be right around June 16th, 17th, because a bunch of us would get married on June 17th, right after the last mini camp. This third phase begins right when OTAs end. Athletes usually go back to wherever they were doing phase one. So if it's at their college, private gym, hometown, whatever it is, that's where they go back to. And now you're going to really just get into the difference being, because it's private and they're geared for you, or you go to your college and they're understanding where you're at in the development cycle. You're going to go right into that power and speed. I don't know when my camera's doing this today, guys. Sorry about that. But you're going to go right into that power and speed development for a heavy block of kind of more football specific movements, very, very heavy on power development, very, very heavy on speed development. Then you're going to break for the 4th of July. Players usually take some break. Maybe they go on vacation, maybe they're visiting family, but right around 4th of July is when you start going like, okay, after this holiday, let's blow it out, have a good time. But after this holiday, it's like football. So there's a light switch that flips for a lot of guys. I remember my wife used to be like, dude, you get kind of mean after the 4th. And I go, yeah, it's just kind of I'm getting back to like, I got to go perform again. So my personality, unfortunately, that's how I was. I shifted a little bit. Probably didn't. My wife was a very patient lady. What happens from a training standpoint is your strength coach, whoever you're with, maybe, and you could still be back at the facility for all of this. You got a great program back at the facility. Some guys will just stay there year round, or maybe they have families, so they're going to stay there year round. The last couple of weeks, you really start acclimatizing to what the demands of training camp would be, whether it's like the test, whether it's just, we used to do a lot of stuff on time now. So we would do like these max effort or 90 or 85% effort reps that lasted 6 to 8 seconds, and then take a 25-second break. Why? Well, it mimicked what we were doing, obviously, from a rep standpoint, and then you could kind of build out your rep or set scheme based on how much volume of work you wanted to do, how you wanted to test that part of not only it's not necessarily even a cardio, but like your metabolic demand, right? So what part of your energy cycle did you want to tax that day? So that stuff is all really good. Obviously, a lot more positional work towards the end. A lot of guys will make the mistake of not doing positional work until the last couple of weeks and try to get brushed up. I think that's a huge mistake because it's just like lifting weights. You're greasing the groove, right? If you want to get good at your pass set, you got to pass set every day. You don't pass that for an hour at the end. But you're fine. You're really, those last couple of weeks before you get to camp, you're really just thinking about fine tuning. The off seasons have changed over the years. Certainly the CBA has altered, I think, some of the value that the teams can offer players. So I think a lot of times when I make these, it sounds like I'm saying that the teams aren't good. It's not necessarily that. I think, who affected that the most? Because there's good coaches out there that want to coach, but who affected the CBA, the Players Association, when they got screwed over by the NFL with as far as how much money they could take, the concessions that they started taking were like, well, we don't want to touch a football. And famously Jeff Saturday didn't want to rehab with Peyton Manning, so he didn't want to touch a football. He put it in the NFL collective bargaining that centers don't have to touch a football for the first X amount of weeks. And we can't be in the building that much. And all that stuff's like, I think for me, it's like net good because I see the value of being away. But I could also, if I was working for a team, I could say, listen, you're handcuffing us. The value that we could be offering isn't able to be offered because of all of the CBA blockades to spending time with you. Does that make sense? I think the real difference now between like when I was going through and what you see now is like there's so much money in the sport, and largely because of the CBA, there are so many private gyms, trainers, facilities, performance groups that they're going after that business. You've got footwork guys, you got speed guys, you got technique guys, you got lifting guys, you got improved and increased number of performance coaches. So more guys are getting their degrees in kinesiology, more guys are getting certified, more guys are getting their master's degree in some sort of exercise science. So you're getting a lot of people, and they're not necessarily like, I always say if I'm starving, I'm in a boat, like I want to talk to the fisherman. I don't care about the oceanographer that much, like, because I want to eat, right? But you do get a lot of guys who are very science-based and very knowledgeable about what they're trying to accomplish with you. That goes back to another point. You see a lot of there's always a big debate in, I think, a lot of different competitive arenas, but certainly in sports on this kind of goes to the data leading decisions. You see a lot of guys that are very scientific based when it comes to like, this is how we're going to develop. This is what the science says. And those guys are always good, but they don't ever seem to be as good as the guys that are rooting their protocols on science as well, but also largely on context, on the individual, on the situation. We have gotten really, really science-based with a lot of the stuff that they do, especially in the building, because you're managing so many people. It's an easier way to parse and snip. What they miss out on, I think, sometimes is some of the individual context on how to treat guys based on positional requirements, based on body type, based on personality, based on training load, based on the sleep last night, all of those things that go in. So that's actually the art and the science that, coming together and building a really good program is understanding I have something that my calculator says, but there's also something that my eyes are seeing and I'm listening to when I'm interacting with this person. The amount of money that there's to be made in the National Football League is so great that now if you're an ambitious player looking for that edge, you're looking for, where can I go? Who can I meet with? What can I learn? What can I develop as to get to that next tier of salary? Because the gap between any two players in the National Football League is probably less than 30%. And here's what I mean by that. If I go to the Green Bay Packers this weekend and I watch a minicamp, and let's say I just watch the offensive line, Zach Tom, Elton Jenkins, maybe, those are the top two linemen. The difference between those guys, like if you put those guys at, a 10 out of 10, the majority of the rest of the people are going to be within 30% of them, like 7, 8, 6-ish, right? 9. There's no like 2s out there, is my point. There's no guys that are like, or fives. There's no guys that are just terrible. Certainly guys that are in the league. If you took those guys and you played them in the same offense and the same plays against the same defenders, the same amount of reps, they're going to grade out about 20 to 30% lower than your top. I'm talking about your top guys. Maybe I'm not using the right guys right here because those guys aren't necessarily, Lane Johnson, Laramie Tunsil, Trent Williams, Jason Kelsey before he retired. Hi. Linderbaum, Tyler, the kid from Baltimore. Those guys, right? The best in the league are going to play better, but they're not twice as good as the average player, okay? But then you start looking at the salary of the really good guys, and you just saw Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell is an elite guy, $28 million a year, okay? So he bumped up the tackle, not left or right tackle, the tackle position. He bumped it by $3 million over, I think, less than 2 years. An average tackle in the league is making, if they're, 8 to 12, maybe. I'm talking about an average guy. Maybe a starter, journeyman, 8, which is a ton of money. But you start thinking, are they twice as good or 2.5 times as good or almost 3 times as good? No. But that's the pay scale differential for these high-level players. So if I can go from a non-starter to a starter, I've doubled my salary. If I can go from a starter to a guy who's well-respected, I've probably doubled it again. If I go to a guy who's going to the Pro Bowl or is a top free agent, from where I started at $5 million to 28, it's a 5 times return. So these phases of the offseason are vital. And when you have guys that are like, they don't like Jair Alexander doesn't come in for workouts. Well, we don't know why he didn't come out for workouts last year. I know he's there this year. But does he think that he's losing his value from coming in or not? That's what the question you got to ask yourself. And that's what's always like, the bottom line is this: the whole process is important. But as a player, you really have to, your preparation is everything. And if you can get 5 pounds stronger over here, a tenth of a second faster over there, or you just, the knowledge that you learn at the building is worth it to live the entire year there and figure out how to get more from the coaching staff as far as, time. You have to uncover every rock because the money is so different. In a finite career, the money is so different from average to good to great to elite. And so you got to make the most of your time. And that's why there's so much business around there. That's why these guys have so many options. Like I used to go to I went to UNLV and then I'd go for a week. I'd go to Iowa, I'd go to Arizona, I'd go to Florida. I'd go check out places for like a week, but I'd always come back to my home base because I had a really good family foundation there. Same thing when I moved and started going to San Diego. I was more about the environment I was in. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I learned something new from a different kind of mentor guru every year, but I wasn't just going to spend time at somebody's gym. But now, if there was a gym where only the best O-linemen were going and pushing each other, and I felt like, well, this is actually interesting for me. So if there was a lot of guys going there, I probably wouldn't go because I would think to myself, well, if you've commoditized this, and if you've commoditized this, you're probably not paying the individual the attention that they need. So I'm going to go somewhere where I can get one-on-one or one-on-two kind of information about my game and how I'm going to get better. And I'd probably go to a specialist in, speed, technique, or strength, etc., as opposed to going to a place that's just churning out like these combine guys. It's like, oh, I got 20 guys in here that played in the NFL. It's like, yeah, dude, but if there's one of you, you can't coach 20 guys very well. I might as well go back to my facility because I'm sure you're running a stock program with stock drills and stock this. And it's like, that doesn't help individuals get better. But the bottom line is like right now we get all the action because they're with the teams, they're putting all their stuff on social media, and it's really important. But it's always, for me, it's kind of fun to think about like, where are these guys going to get the most bang for their buck? Which phase matters the most to them? I don't know if there's a good answer, but I do know what you do to get your mind right before training camp is probably the most important. Also want to talk about this. There's a couple of surprises before we go into tape today. The Packers just signed, his name is Spencer, I'll butcher this, Waege, W-A-E-G-E, defensive lineman from the San Francisco 49ers. These are the kind of moves I really like, and I'm going to tell you why. Because this guy's a practice squad player, so I don't know if he's any good. He's like 6'5", 295, so good build. For me personally, that's the kind of build that might give me some trouble. Former teammate of Christian Washington, North Dakota State University. So he's a small town player, but he's got a good frame. So my thought process with the Christian, as you guys know, was if you go to North Dakota State University and you're the athlete that he is, you obviously weren't at some point. So you probably had to persevere a little bit more to get where you're at. I like that mentality. What I really like is that he's been coached by arguably now the best in the business, Chris Korosek, or I say his name wrong every time. Kocurek. It's Kocurek. He is, I was with him in Miami. He's the best D-line coach that I've seen, aside from his mentor, who was Washburn, who was an old Detroit Lions guy. He's amazing. He's the guy that worked with Sue a lot. But Chris is he's very intense. He's a great teacher. He's a great developer of talent. You see how good the San Francisco 49ers D-line is. And I'm always curious to see, and I don't know if we'll get this information. This is, again, stuff that we're not privy to, but I'm always curious to see when you come from a top program, like the San Francisco 49ers defensive line room, how do you find the practice standards, the communication standards, like the way that you go about your business in your new building? And I always think about, we had this guy in Miami, Byron Maxwell. Byron Maxwell is part of the Legion Boom well, I think it was the second wave of the Legion Boom in Seattle. Max was another one of those Seattle guys. It wasn't like a highly sought draft pick, ended up having a really good career, took a big free agent deal, went to Miami. And when he got down there, Max is one of those dudes that would just come hang out. And, he always getting stretched out and stuff. Really, really funny guy. And I was just so curious about Pete because, the aura around Pete Carroll and his enthusiasm and the way that, the real aura was like, they practice so hard. And I can tell you firsthand, just from, working with some guys up there now before Pete had just moved on, like their practices are different than other practices. But I used to ask Max, like, what do you think? Like during training camp, compare what we're doing out there to Seattle, because you got to remember when I went back to Miami, the last time I had really seen football was like when I was playing, the rules were different. So the intensity of practice, the length, the duration, the frequency, different. So I'm watching this Miami tape like, man, I know it's hot down here, but like, what are we doing? Like Max would go, guys here could not practice in Seattle. They just couldn't handle the intensity. And he said part of the reason was the weather. You kind of figured, but they practiced so much more intensely and competitively at Seattle with Pete than they did down in Miami that it wasn't a wonder that the team wasn't as good. Now, this is, of course, multiple coaching staffs ago and everything, and I think things have even evolved from there as far as what the expectations are from a practice standpoint. But old school Pete Carroll, let's go, draft, develop guys, play them. They got to really earn their second contract kind of thing. We're going to churn through. Like, that's what he grew up on. And I'm always interested to see when you come from a really, really high-level program with a number one defense, what you see with, like, the Green Bay Packers staff and, especially with a new defensive coordinator coming. So that'll be interesting. This should also, coming up, should be like the first preview of our new Packers defense with the new DC, former BC head coach. I think it's Jeff Hafley. I'm going to say Hafley. Maybe it's Hafley, but I don't. What do I know? Bringing in a new scheme, a couple of new coaches, most notably new passing and run game coordinators, Derek Ainsley and Anthony Campanile. Jason, now this is interesting because we were just talking about the defensive line. Jason Rebovich is taking over as the head D-line coach. He worked as the outside linebackers coach 2 years ago. So he had Preston and Rashawn. He was a pass rush specialist in 2023, which is a kind of a newish position, but it's really the assistant D-line coach. They just wanted to give you a different bill. I would really like to see how he teaches pass rush. I think that would be like, I'm interested to see that. Interested in how he talks about spacing. Interested in how he talks about cutting angles. What the priorities are. How to read. What are they? What are the tip tells and takeaways that they're using? I can't say for sure whether or not the pass rush has been a strength or an area of opportunity for Green Bay. Like, we don't have a guy with double-digit sacks last year, but I think we had, I think Rashawn had 9, Preston had 8, Kenny had 7. I know there's a half there somewhere. But guys that are producing, certainly Kenny was good last year. You always feel like, and Rashawn was coming off injury, and you always feel like Rashawn maybe, I always think that he could have more, but I know that he works with, I've kind of watched him do on some private stuff too, and why he's not getting more. We talked about it on this. I can tell you why. Preston seems to just be very, very consistent. He's going to get what he's going to get. They're right in the middle. They had 45 sacks last year. Sacks don't tell the story. I'm kind of being lazy with that, but if you watch the tape, how many, generally speaking, if you have 45 sacks, you probably had 130 opportunities, converted on a third of them ish, 135 opportunities, converted on 30 of them.